Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, October 30th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman from the state of New York, setting an announcement after the New York City mayoral race this upcoming Tuesday. With high expectations that Zohran Mamdani is going to win that race, Elise Stefanik is set to announce this bid that she's been floating for months on end now across the country, as she's been going not just across New York, but like I said, across the country from state to state, making it very clear and being very adamant that her time in the House seems to be coming to an end. Now, whether or not that means she's going to do well in the governor's election is an entirely separate question. My estimation of it and my take at initial glance is Elise Stefanik is announcing a bid that ends her political career as we know it so far. Maybe she finds her way into the Donald Trump administration. Maybe she finds her way into, a private lobbying firm. Who knows what's going to happen? But one thing is clear. Elise Stefanik will never be governor of the state of New York, and in that vein, as she decides to run for governor, she cannot simultaneously run for House of Representatives, ultimately leaving the end open for the one of the formerly highest-ranking Republicans in the House of Representatives. So how did we get this far? How did a safe seat Republican who came from upstate New York, who reliably could count on victory after victory in this state, even as much as the Democrats drew her district to be a Republican vote sink, make the decision that she was going to give up this seat that provides her so much notability across the country? Well, it all started with Donald Trump withdrawing the UN ambassador nomination for Elise Stefanik in the earlier on months of 2025. Elise Stefanik was set to be one of the first appointments to go through Senate confirmation. It ended up getting held off until about middle of March, to which the Trump administration started having second guesses about whether or not they should nominate her to the UN ambassadorship, not because she was deemed disloyal, not because they didn't feel like she was up for the challenge. I think they certainly really, really liked her. Stefanik has been an advocate of the president for a very long time. It simply came down to electoral math. Elise Stefanik in the last election won her re-election point by 24%, but she outperformed Donald Trump in New York's 21st district, which voted across its district lines in favor of the president by about 21. A day before the Donald Trump administration withdrew the UN ambassadorship, Democrats flipped a state Senate district in the state of Pennsylvania with roughly similar partisanship. They flipped it in an off-year election that the Democrats felt very excited about. And it started to see warning signs for the Republicans across the country and in the Oval Office. And New York's 21st district, which was set to have a special election, did not, in fact, have a special election, because Donald Trump withdrew her announcement out of fear that a Democrat might replace her in the House of Representatives. So she lost everything. She gave up her position in Republican leadership. She was going on a goodbye tour across the district. I mean, at every point that you had turned, Elise Stefanik was prepping for a departure from the House. But after Donald Trump pulled it, it became an entire thing about numbers and the calculus around the Republican governing majority and what could have been afforded to Donald Trump and the Republican administration at this point and what they deserve going into the midterms. And so Elise Stefanik making this decision to run for governor, I do think, adamantly at her core, she knows this is certainly an uphill battle. It's a Democratic state that hasn't had a Republican governor in quite some time, and Elise Stefanik is not the type of Republican that can do well in the state of New York. And I think that she's waiting after the victory that Mamdani's expecting to have in New York City to try to build out this idea that she would be, juxtaposed with the mayor of New York City, and that would somehow rile up the base, even though Mamdani is the most popular politician out of almost any of them, save AOC, in the city of New York, which comprises of over 8.3 million residents and is the biggest voting area across the state that drives the state to the left. No doubt that would happen again in 2026. What I think this is Elise Stefanik pushing back away from the House leadership that she feels might have screwed her over when it came down to the Senate nomination. When it came down to the UN ambassadorship, I think that, it wasn't just Donald Trump who decided to suddenly stumble on a special election result to make this conscious decision. It was certainly the advisors close to Mike Johnson who paid attention to it and said, wait a second, Elise Stefanik could lose this seat, not her, but the Republican who is set to replace her in the nomination could lose it to a Democrat. The Democrats had already started organizing. They had already launched campaigns. They had set up volunteer apparatuses. I mean, we saw a full-fledged effort to replace her. And so, I do believe that Stefanik is sort of pushing back not only against Trump in this bid for governor, but also against Mike Johnson. They're losing a popular congresswoman from this district. No doubt it still goes to the GOP, but it could be far more narrower than it's expected. And with her departure, the Democrats practically have free reign, if they do redraw the map in 2028, to draw out whoever is here, because the political capital that they would have would be quite insignificant. And so thinking about, how that makes an impact on, the 2026 cycle, I don't think it really matters for, the actual results of the House races, but I do think that it matters when it comes down to gubernatorial performance. You might be thinking, okay, Elise Stefanik running for governor, why does that even matter? Why is this even, major news? I do think on one end, certainly shows that there's a rift in the GOP, there's a fracture within, party allegiance and willingness to stay in your congressional bid because Donald Trump wants you to, as he did want her to, and wanted to keep her in the House, but she's saying no more. The congressional bid can also make or break House races in New York, and Democrats know that far too well, looking at the last midterm cycle where Democrats lost a lot of seats relative to 2020. The math here certainly was a better map for the GOP, but the narrow amount of seats that they lost, including the DCCC chair, in the state of New York, only happened because at the top of the ticket, Kathy Hochul was only winning by 6 points. I think Republicans saw this as a sleeper race, invested a lot in it. Lee Zeldin left the House to run for governor and actually came quite close, but the tides are different. I mean, we saw 2022 as a red wave. We don't see 2026 the same way. My honest take here is that I think Elise Stefanik is far too close to Donald Trump and the administration to do well in this state. Lee Zeldin, who undoubtedly had the, support of Donald Trump and, this race wasn't really on anybody's radar, still was able to find that his appeal to the voters in New York was that he was seen as someone that was more moderate. He was seen as someone that was, more in the back and forth. And so thinking about, Lee Zeldin as a Republican, sure, Trump endorsed, doesn't mean entirely Trump aligned. Obviously, that was the case. Trump loved him, even floated him as a potential VP pick. But it was about vibes. It was about the way that voters perceived him. And Kathy Hochul's approval rating was a fraction of what it is today. In 2026, the data already says that if it is Stefanik, Kathy Hochul does quite well. The only poll you're going to find that shows it even competitive is a Republican internal, and even the previous Republican internal had Kathy Hochul up. And the problem is for Republicans, across the state, is that they expect Mamdani to be this, huge boogeyman to drive voters to the polls to vote for for Elise Stefanik or whichever Republican they're deciding to put up. But that's not how voters in the city of New York are going to go. I mean, the Democrats are going to do quite well in upstate New York with or without New York City, obviously. But combined with the fact that New York City comprises millions upon millions of residents, I'm not buying it that we're suddenly going to see a change of heart, a year after an election where they're likely to elect Mamdani by a pretty significant amount. One where, Curtis Lewa can't even clear 22% and might even get less percent of the vote as the Republican nominee in the mayor's race in 2025. And so in comparison to 2021. And so even the idea too, a lot of these Cuomo voters are still going to vote for Kathy Hochul because a lot of them are in fact Democrats or independents who lean to the left that do not agree with Mamdani. But besides that, you're not going to find them moving over in droves in favor to Elise Stefanik. This is really a pipe dream. And I think it could not come at a worse time for the GOP. It's not in 2022, it's not 2010, it's not 2014. It is not the times where this was certainly seen and deemed as possible. You are literally going up against an impossible and an impenetrable blue wave and expecting all of a sudden a Democrat plus 14 state to vote to the left, vote to the right, significantly so relative to the last cycle. Even though Kamala Harris might have underperformed in New York, she still won it by nearly 15 points. I think, that's what's really interesting about this is that, even in the best case scenario for the GOP, in 2024, they still lose this race by a pretty significant amount. This state shifted 10 points to the right, and Democrats were a point off from it being still a safe state. And so I think there are people who are close to the ear of Elise Stefanik who are feeding these delusions, feeding this idea that she should leave the House and instead run for governor, because anybody who knows anything about politics knows this is a bad decision. but it may not be a decision of someone who thinks they're going to win. I think it's very possible that Elise Stefanik's time in public service right now comes to a close. She might go and stay involved in D.C. politics. Who knows? Trump might find something open for her and appoint her to be part of the administration. But that's a lot of, waiting and seeing, and that would only come after January of 2027 at the earliest, by the time she vacates her House office. And maybe that'll happen. Big maybe. Stefanik, who I think was on track for one of the biggest and most notable climbs in politics that we've seen. Just 22 years ago, she was an undergrad, right? When you think about that and put it into perspective, Elise Stefanik is by no means the, next Republican nominee for president, nor was she ever going to be. But I could have seen her as vice president. I could have seen her as Secretary of State in the next time. And I could have seen her in a really strong position. Donald Trump even floated picking her for VP in 2024. And had he done so, I think they still would have won the election. A huge fall from grace. And now, a decision to run for an office that she's not even going to get within 10 points of. And I think that there is this idea that, run a good Republican, run a strong Republican, you can do well in New York, you can do well anywhere. That obviously is not the case, and I really question that whether or not Elise Stefanik even is a good Republican in this case, because I do not think voters really gravitate towards her, for the 2026 cycle or beyond. I don't think that she has the reputation. I don't think she has the disassociation with Trump necessary, but the allegiance of Trump necessary to win the primary. All of these different things. I think she's too far in on an administration that in this state that she wants to govern, they despise Donald Trump. He's down 25 points in New York by every single survey. And I think she thinks that Mamdani is going to be this Hail Mary that saves her and allows her to win the governorship. It just simply isn't going to happen. It's delusional. And it's something that I think the Republican Party needs to move on from. Elise Stefanik, who's about to give up the cushiest, House bid and House election and House seat that any Republican probably will have in New York, and thinking about what that means for 2026 is beyond, is that Stefanik's seat's probably gone. If Democrats get a redraw, no doubt in my mind, they target her seat as well and try to draw out the Republican there, because there's no type of political capital that any type of newly elected Republican congressman would have, or congresswoman would have in the state of New York. And, thinking about this, I think it's a very quick departure from politics, and I do think it's one that is being guided, one, either by advisors who truly believe she can win. Spoiler alert, she won't. Or two, she knows she's going to lose. And this is her way of bucking the party and bucking Donald Trump for withdrawing her UN ambassadorship, and she'll have to wait and see what's for her next. She's young in political terms, and I think that she has a future that certainly can extend far beyond Donald Trump's dominance on electoral politics. But insofar that it gets her to the governorship in New York, that's a hard no, it's a hard pass, and I don't even think she'd do better than Lee Zeldin did in 2022, even with much higher name ID and probably a lot more money that would be invested into this race. Elise Stefanik won't be governor, won't be a congresswoman either. It looks like her time in politics might be coming to a very swift end. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.